Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett. Today I'm here with part 4 on how to save money purchasing wood, and today the topic is purchasing from a lumber store. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to do that. Click that little notification bell right next to it, and let's get on with talking about dealing with lumber stores. Now, a lot of us purchase lumber for specific projects that we're going to be making. And the nice thing with dealing with lumber stores is when you buy the lumber, it's already dry, it's ready to go, and you're going to pay a little bit more for that luxury of having lumber that's all ready for you to use. Now, the biggest thing you can do to help yourself is preparing, and what you do before you arrive at the lumber store is probably more important than what you do at the lumber store. And what I can tell you is when you go to purchase wood from a lumber store, do not be afraid to ask. Ask where the lumber is before you even start picking it. Ask them if they have any specials. Sometimes, in fact, very often, lumber stores will have different specials of different woods, so you'll want to know that ahead of time. And ask if they have different sizes in different locations, because sometimes there's some wood in one location and the same wood in another location, but it might be longer or shorter or something like that. So make sure you know all of those things before you ever start picking your lumber. Now, when I say being prepared ahead of time can be one of the most important things to do, the one thing you want to know before you even arrive at the lumber store is how many board feet you're going to need. And it's more than just knowing the board feet, because when you arrive at the lumber store, for example, you don't know, or maybe you do know, but typically you don't know what they're going to have on hand. And I've seen myself do this. When I arrive at the lumber store, I have the number of board feet figured out, how many boards I need, and they're usually 8 feet long, but I've figured it out for 6-inch wide boards. And when I get there, they say, sorry, we don't have any 6-inch wide boards. All we have are 4-inch boards at the moment. Now, I can still use 4-inch boards, but now I don't know what the board feet is because I've already got it figured out to 6-inch widths. So when you prepare your board feet, prepare your board feet for how many boards you're going to need for 4 inches, for 5 inches, and for 6 inches. Now, the good part is if you prepare it for 4 inches and you find out that there's 8-inch boards that you can purchase, all you need to do is half the number that you used for the 4-inch. So it works both ways. Now, the reason I'm saying 5-inch is once in a while, some lumber stores will get like a special on 5-inch wide lumber. It's because it's not 6 because that's standard, and it's not 4 because that's standard, so they'll get something that's 5. And if you don't have it figured out for the number of board feet in a 5-inch wide board, now you're lost again. And the other thing, when you're purchasing, no matter what you're purchasing, buy at least 20, sometimes 25% more lumber than what you think you're going to use, because there's going to be some defects in there that we'll talk about in a minute, but you're always going to need a little bit more than what you think. Now, when you arrive at the lumber store, don't be afraid to have a list with you of all of the things that you need. Don't be embarrassed about that. I've seen tons of good carpenters, good woodworkers arrive with lists of what they need. And the other thing is, if you've got a smartphone or even just a calculator that you can figure out things, sometimes you will run across a wood store that has, they may not have the exact wood that you want, or maybe they've got a special on something else, and maybe you want some highlight material, something. You want to be able to figure that out. So have some kind of a pen or pencil available and a calculator so that you can quietly go off in the corner and figure out if there's something else that you may want to purchase. One of the things that happens at many wood stores is they separate some bits of wood. And I talked about this in the last video. But at wood stores, they will often put flat sawn and rift sawn wood in one pile, and it's all stacked up that way. And they'll put the quarter sawn, because quarter sawn is a premium wood, and they'll often put that in a different area or a different location because it's a premium wood. They charge more for it, and the reason is because there's not as much of it. Now, if you're in a situation where you're buying wood, maybe you're making a little counter, a little desk or something, and we always try and put the best wood on top because it's the closest where people are going to be touching it and looking at it. And you might want to put quarter sawn wood on top. Now, if that's what you're going to do and you're going to pay a little bit more for that wood, you already know that, go and pick that wood first of all. And the reason is because there's not as much to choose from in quarter sawn, because I said it's not, there's not as much of it, not as much volume of it. So buy that wood that you need first of all. And the reason is because when you go to buy the rest of the material, which could be flat sawn or rift sawn or a combination of, that you're going to use to build the rest of the material, there will be much more volumes of that, because when they mill the tree, there's way more of it. And now when you already have the quarter sawn, it's much easier to match the colors, the color of the wood and the tone of the wood with the other wood, the rift sawn or the flat sawn wood, because there's a lot more of it. So get the wood that's harder to find first of all, and then match that to the volumes that you want. Well, and now we get to the part that's more fun, and that's the actual picking of the lumber. Now, when you're selecting lumber, a lot of lumber stores, you're going to have three choices of lumber that you might see. And the first one, and we talked about this in the last series, you could get rough sawn lumber, and it depends where the lumber comes from. Some exotic woods still come in very rough, so you could be finding lumber like that. You could also be getting lumber that we call surface planed, and this means that the lumber has been planed a little bit. There might still be some rough spots on it, but the purpose of surface planing is so that when we're looking at wood and selecting wood, it's much easier to see the grain and the color and what we're purchasing. Now, the third kind of wood that you might find is wood that's been, not only has it been surface planed, it's actually been thickness planed. So when we look at the difference here, when I put these three of them together, so there's rough, you can see how thick it is. There's surface plane. Now, surface plane does not mean it's been thickness plane, but you may also find thickness plane, and of course you're going to pay, you could pay a little bit more for that. It really depends on the lumber store and how they're selling things. So those are the three variables. So when you're looking at lumber, be careful that when you might think that you're buying 3/4 inch, it might only be surface plane. So again, if you don't know, ask. So when it comes to that point where you're actually starting to look at lumber, what do you look for? Well, the very first thing you want to look for, and usually this lumber will be placed so that you can look at it. They're not going to hide it away. They leave it out so that you can go through it and pick through and pick what you want. And the very first thing you want to look for are boards that are the straightest and flattest. Now, it depends on the project that you're working on. For example, if you're making a door, you're going to want really nice, long, straight, flat pieces. But if you're making a cabinet that's, say, only 18 inches, you're going to be a little bit less critical. But here's what you do. So you'll flip the board up on end, and will view down it to see how straight it is, how straight and flat. And I think if I move that there, you'll be able to see that that board is pretty straight and flat. Now, if I take that board and compare it with another one, and I hand pick this so that you'll be able to see, if you have a look at the next board, now this one is I don't know if you can actually see, but I think you can. This board has got what we call a dog leg in it. It's warped right sort of at this area here. And it's good for about 3 feet, but then beyond that, it it's not so good. Now, the reason that we want to see a board straight and flat, obviously we want wood that's straight and flat, but the other reason is, maybe if I hold this up, you can see that a little bit better. I think you can there. There's a good example of how you can see that when I look in my monitor there. And the reason that this board is like that is, look at, guess what? There's a big knot here in it. So whenever you find a board that's not absolutely straight, there's a really good chance it's got something like a big knot or some twisted grain or something in it. There will be a defect. So that's your first test when you're looking for wood. If it's nice and straight and flat, there's a really good chance it's going to be a nice clear piece of wood. If it's not, if it's got wiggles and warped and twists in it, there's probably things like big nasty knots, or maybe it's the grain is, there's something going on with the grain in it. So that's how to start picking out what wood you want. Now, the other big defect you're going to want to watch for, and it's more critical when you're looking for wood from a lumber store, it's cracks. And because you're getting wood from a lumber store, you're probably not going to see as much of it, but you still want to be aware of it, because, for example, on this nice wide board, it's probably 6 or 7 inches wide. There's a big nasty crack, but not only that, when I flip it around, obviously the crack goes through both ways, but because this is a flat sawn board, or a rift sawn board rather, you can see the diagonal of the crack. So it's not something that I could easily, where's that crack there? And there's that crack. You can see how that crack goes diagonally. So it's not just something that you can cut around. There's actually a big waste of wood here that you can't use. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to watch for things like that. Well, that concludes my video on saving money when purchasing from a lumber store. And you know, the nice thing about lumber stores is you're always buying wood. It's always stored inside. It's either stacked vertically or stacked horizontally, so it's easy to find, easy to look at. Take your time going through it, and when you follow some of the tips that I've given you here, that will help you make better choices on the wood that you're selecting, so that you get more value from the wood that you're picking. And for those of you that watched the last video on buying from the mill, remember I talked about getting shorts from the mill? Well, guess what? If the mill doesn't sell the shorts, they kiln dry them and sell them to the lumber store. So you could still get shorts from a lumber store, and you'll find them. They'll have them stacked somewhere with a special price on them. And there's some very good buys that you can get when you go to the lumber store, when you look for those kinds of things. I'm Colin Cadet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.